The chamber doors close behind me before I even finish walking through them, and the sound is louder than it should be. A single metallic click, and then silence. 300 delegates from 42 worlds are staring at me, and not one of them is smiling. My name is Daniel Hartley. I am the ambassador of Earth to the Cadrevex Galactic Council, and I was told this morning that today's session would be a routine review. It is not routine. I can feel that the moment I step onto the speaking floor and see the speaker's seat raised higher than usual, the way it only rises for matters the Council considers serious. Speaker Elira Thess looks down at me from her platform. Her skin has the pale blue sheen common to her species, the Vantosh, and her eyes never blink the way human eyes do, which always makes conversations with her feel like being studied rather than spoken to. Ambassador Hartley, she says, her translated voice smooth and calm, you are aware of the incident at the colony designated New Halden. It is not a question, but I answer anyway. I am aware. 12 days ago, a Skarn hegemony strike force crossed into our declared territory and struck a civilian settlement. We lost communication with the colony for 6 hours. We are still counting the cost. A murmur moves through the chamber. Not sympathy, something closer to impatience. I notice the Skarn delegation sitting near the back, arms folded, watching me with an expression I have learned to read as satisfaction. The Council has reviewed the incident, Thess continues, and has concluded that Earth's presence in that sector was, at minimum, provocative. The border in question has long been contested. I feel my jaw tighten, but I keep my voice level. That border was recognized by this very Council 11 years ago. I have the ratification records if the Council needs reminding. We do not need reminding, Ambassador. We need a resolution that avoids further conflict. Thess folds her long fingers together. The Council proposes that Earth withdraw its colonial claim from the New Halden sector, reduce its fleet presence along the contested zone by 70%, and accept Skarn oversight of the region going forward. In exchange, the hegemony has agreed to cease further action. For a moment, I do not respond, because I am making sure I heard it correctly. They want us to hand over a settlement that was attacked, remove our ability to defend it, and call that a resolution. I look around the chamber, searching for even one delegate who seems uncomfortable with what was just said. I do not find one. Let me understand this proposal clearly, I say. A colony of ours was struck without warning. People were hurt, homes were destroyed, and the Council's solution is to reward the side that attacked us. The Council's solution, Thess says, her tone sharpening slightly, is to prevent a small border dispute from becoming a war that could draw in dozens of species. Earth has been a member of this Council for 11 years. You have not yet demonstrated the patience this body requires. Patience. I have heard that word directed at humanity more times than I can count since we were admitted to this Council. It is usually delivered with a faint smile, as if patience were something we lacked because of some flaw in our nature, rather than something we have simply run out of after watching our people get hurt while diplomats debate procedure. I glance toward the human observation gallery, where my aide, Laura Bennett, sits with a data pad in her lap. She gives me the smallest shake of her head, a signal we agreed on before I ever walked in here. It means, they are testing you. Stay calm, do not give them a reaction to use against us. I take a slow breath. I would like to know, I say, whether the Council formally investigated the Skarn incursion before reaching this proposal, or whether this resolution was drafted before the investigation even began. Silence. Thess does not answer immediately, and that silence tells me everything. A delegate from the Skarn seats rises. He is tall, with the ridged gray skin typical of his people, and he speaks without waiting to be acknowledged, which itself is a small insult in Council protocol. Ambassador Hartley speaks as though his colony was innocent, the Skarn delegate says. His name, I already know from the briefing files, is Vorka Dresk. Humanity has expanded aggressively into space that has long been disputed. Perhaps if your species had shown more restraint, this incident would never have occurred. Your ships crossed an established border and opened fire on people who were not armed, I say, keeping my voice even though something inside me is starting to burn. There is no version of restraint that changes that fact. There is no proof the border was crossed intentionally, Vorka says smoothly. Sensor errors happen. Perhaps humanity's equipment is simply outdated. A few delegates actually laugh at that. Quiet laughter, the kind meant to be heard. I feel heat rise in my chest, but I do not let it show on my face. I have spent 11 years learning how to sit in rooms like this and absorb insults aimed at everything I represent, because losing composure here has always meant losing ground. But something about today feels different. Maybe it is the 6 hours we spent not knowing if New Halden still existed. Maybe it is the message I received from the colony's medical director, describing what they found in the wreckage, a message I have not been able to stop thinking about since I read it. Speaker Thess raises a hand, and the chamber quiets. Ambassador Hartley, the Council understands your position. However, we must consider the wider galactic order. A prolonged conflict between Earth and the hegemony would destabilize 6 border sectors. The Council's proposal is designed to prevent that outcome. We ask that you accept it, on behalf of your government, before this session concludes. I look at her for a long moment. Then I look at the rows of delegates, species who have sat on this council for centuries, who speak about balance and order as though those words alone can undo what happened at New Halden. I cannot accept this proposal today, I say, not because I want conflict, because I will not stand in front of my government and tell them that the price of peace is surrendering a colony that was defending itself. Thess's expression does not change, but something in the room shifts, a tightening, as though the entire chamber just leaned forward without moving. Then the Council will consider your refusal a formal rejection, Ambassador. I would advise you to consult with your government quickly. This offer will not remain available indefinitely. I understand, I say. I will bring your proposal to Earth. But I want it recorded, formally, in this session, that a Council member accused humanity of provoking an attack on an unarmed colony without completing an investigation. Thess pauses, then nods once. It will be recorded. The session is adjourned a few minutes later, but the tension does not leave the room with the delegates. As I walk out through the tall arched doors, I catch Vorka Dresk watching me from across the chamber, and for just a second, his composed expression cracks into something that looks almost like anticipation, as if he is looking forward to what comes next. Laura meets me in the corridor outside, matching my pace as I walk faster than I probably should. That went about as well as I expected, she says quietly. They didn't even finish the investigation, I say. They had the resolution ready before the session started. I know. Laura glances around to make sure no one is close enough to hear us, which means someone wanted this outcome before we ever walked in. I stop walking. You think the Council wanted this? I think, she says carefully, that the timing is too clean. The attack happens, and within 12 days the Council has a full resolution ready that benefits the Skarn hegemony and costs us a colony. That's not how Council bureaucracy usually moves. You know that better than anyone. She is right, and the thought settles into my stomach like a stone. I have spent over a decade learning how slowly this Council moves on anything, how a simple trade dispute can take months to resolve. A resolution this complete, this quickly, is not something that happens by accident. We need everything we can get on how this proposal was drafted, I say. Who wrote it, who reviewed it, how fast it moved through committee. I already put in a request, Laura says. It was denied, classified under Council security protocol. I stare at her. Classified from a member state? Classified from us specifically, she says. I checked. 3 other delegations have full access to the drafting history. We don't. For a long moment, neither of us says anything. Around us, the corridor is filled with delegates from a dozen species, moving between chambers, speaking in a mixture of languages smoothed into a single translated hum by the implants most of us wear. None of them seem to notice the 2 humans standing still in the middle of the flow, but I feel, for the first time since I arrived on this station 11 years ago, that I am not looking at indifference anymore. I am looking at something closer to a trap, one that has been closing slowly enough that none of us noticed until the door was already half shut. Get me everything you can, through any channel you have, I tell Laura. I don't care if it's official or not. I want to know why this council is suddenly in such a hurry to hand our people over to the hegemony. She nods, already turning to leave, her pace quickening the moment she is out of the speaker's line of sight. I stand alone in the corridor for a moment longer, watching the flow of delegates who represent a governing body that has just asked me to trade away a colony full of my own people for the promise of quiet. I think about New Halden. I think about the 6 hours of silence, and the message from the medical director, and the fact that this council listened to all of it and still decided the fault might lie with us. Patience, Speaker Thess called it. I walk back toward the human delegation offices, and for the first time in 11 years on this station, I do not feel patient at all. I feel something colder and more focused settling into place behind my ribs, something that tells me this session was only the opening move of a game far larger than a single contested border, and that whatever comes next, I am not going to play it the way they expect. The human delegation offices sit on the outer ring of the council station, a modest cluster of rooms compared to the grand halls given to older member species. But tonight, they feel more like a command post than an embassy. Laura has already pulled together a small team by the time I arrive, 3 analysts hunched over data screens, and Nora Fairweather, our intelligence liaison, standing near the window with her arms crossed. Nora is the kind of person who says very little until she has something worth saying, so when she speaks first, I know it matters. We have a problem bigger than the resolution, she says. I pulled shipping logs from the sector around New Halden, going back 4 months. The Skarn fleet movements weren't random. They were rehearsing this. I sit down across from her, rehearsing an attack on a civilian colony. Rehearsing a specific kind of attack, Nora says. Fast strike, minimal engagement, retreat before any real response could form. It's not the profile of a border skirmish. It's the profile of a test. A test of what? Of us, she says simply. Of how Earth responds when hit without warning. Whether we escalate, whether we fold, whether we go straight to this council for help or handle it ourselves. Laura looks up from her screen, and based on today, they got their answer. We went straight to the council, and the council handed them a win before we even finished explaining what happened. I lean back, trying to fit the pieces together, the way I would any other diplomatic puzzle, except this one has a shape I do not like. You're saying the attack on New Halden wasn't really about the colony at all. I'm saying the colony was the opening question, Nora says. The real experiment is happening in that chamber, watching how this council responds when a member species gets tested, and so far, the council's response has been to reward the side doing the testing. The room goes quiet except for the low hum of the station's ventilation. I think back to Vorka Dresk's expression in the chamber, that flicker of anticipation, and it starts to make a different kind of sense. He was not just enjoying the debate, he was watching for something. There's more, Nora says, and she hesitates for a moment before continuing, which is unlike her. I managed to get partial access to an internal council communication log, through a contact I'd rather not name. It's fragments, not the full record, but it's enough. She taps her screen, and a short string of translated text appears, stripped of most context but still readable. Proposal drafted in advance of full incident review, pending confirmation of hegemony compliance with secondary agreement. Recommend expedited council vote to preserve regional stability before Earth delegation can organize opposition. I read it twice, to make sure I understand it correctly. They wrote the resolution before the investigation, before they even knew the full details of what happened at New Halden, before, and possibly in coordination with, the Skarn hegemony, Nora says. The phrase secondary agreement isn't explained in what I have access to, but it strongly suggests some kind of deal already existed between parts of this council and the hegemony, separate from anything involving us. Laura sets down her datapad slowly. So this wasn't a resolution meant to prevent a war. It was a resolution meant to hand Earth's colony to the hegemony as part of an arrangement that had nothing to do with fairness. That's my read, Nora says. And if I'm right, today wasn't the Council failing to protect us through incompetence. It was the Council choosing not to protect us, on purpose. I sit with that for a long moment. 11 years ago, when Earth was first admitted to this Council, I remember standing in a much smaller room, listening to leaders back home debate whether joining a body of alien governments was even wise. Some argued that humanity, still young and still healing from the wars that nearly ended us a century before we ever reached the stars, had no business trying to sit at a table with civilizations that had been navigating interstellar politics for millennia. Others argued that staying outside such a body would leave us isolated and vulnerable. We chose to join because the alternative felt like walking into the dark alone. And for 11 years, mostly, it worked. We were patronized, underestimated, occasionally insulted, but we were never actively sacrificed. Today changed that. I need to talk to allied delegations, I say, quietly. I want to know if anyone else sees what we're seeing, or if we're the only ones being tested here. Nora shakes her head. I already reached out to 2 contacts on friendly delegations. Both of them told me, off the record, to accept the Council's proposal. Why? Because they're afraid, she says. If the Council is willing to sacrifice a member species to keep the peace with the Skarn hegemony, nobody wants to be next in line for that treatment. Best way to avoid that is to stay quiet and let it happen to someone else. The bluntness of it hits harder than I expect. I think of every meeting I have sat through over the years, every alliance carefully built through small favors and shared interests, and I realize how thin all of it actually is. When it mattered, when a member species needed real support instead of polite sympathy, the room went silent. There's one more thing, Laura says quietly, and something in her voice makes me look up. I pulled the casualty report from New Halden again, the full version this time, not the summary we gave the Council. She turns her screen toward me. I have read the summary a dozen times since the attack, numbers and status updates that, while devastating, had started to feel almost abstract after so much repetition. The full report is different. It includes names. It includes a section describing the moment communication was lost, written by a junior technician who kept transmitting status updates for as long as the equipment allowed, describing the approach of Skarn ships that did not slow down, did not attempt contact, and did not stop even after the colony's minimal defense grid went dark. I read the last line the technician sent before the signal cut out completely. "We are not a military target. Please confirm you understand that. We are not a military target." I set the pad down carefully, because my hands are not quite steady, and I do not want anyone in this room to see that. They knew, I say quietly. The Skarn ships knew exactly what New Halden was. This wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't a border dispute. It was a message. And the Council's response to that message, Nora says, was to reward the sender. I stand up and walk to the window, looking out at the slow rotation of the station against the stars, at the distant lights of 100 other delegations going about their evening as though nothing unusual happened today. Somewhere out there, Speaker Thess is likely finishing her own evening, satisfied that the human delegation received its instructions and will fall in line, the way smaller, newer species are generally expected to. I'm not going to bring this proposal back to Earth as something we should accept, I say, still facing the window. But I also can't walk back into that chamber tomorrow and simply refuse again without something to back it up. They'll frame it as emotional, as humanity being unable to handle a difficult but necessary compromise. So what do we need? Laura asks. I turn back to face the room. We need proof of coordination between the Council and the hegemony. We need to know exactly what that secondary agreement is, and we need to know what our own fleet can actually do if this Council decides to formally side against us. Nora's expression tightens slightly. You're talking about preparing for a scenario where the Council doesn't just fail to help us, where they actively work against us. I'm talking about preparing for the scenario we're already in, I say. We just haven't admitted it out loud yet. There is a long silence in the room. Outside, the station continues its slow, indifferent rotation, carrying all of us forward into whatever tomorrow's session will bring. I'll contact Fleet Command, Nora finally says. Quietly, General Ethan Cole should know what we've found before this goes any further. Do it tonight, I say. And Laura, I want everything you can gather on this secondary agreement, even fragments. If the Council thinks it can draft our future without us in the room, I want proof of it sitting on the table the next time they try. She nods and gets to work immediately, and the room fills with the quiet, focused sound of people preparing for something none of us wanted, but all of us can now see coming. I stay by the window a moment longer, thinking about the technician's last message, about the 6 hours of silence, about a council that measured the value of an entire colony against the convenience of avoiding a difficult conversation with the Scarn hegemony. Patience, Speaker Thess had called it, as though humanity's tolerance for being tested was something we should be ashamed of running low on. I think about 11 years of careful diplomacy, 11 years of proving we belonged in that chamber, by being reasonable, accommodating, and slow to anger, and I feel that version of myself starting to fall away, replaced by something colder and far more certain of what has to happen next. Tomorrow I will walk back into that chamber, and this time I will not be the ambassador they expect. By morning, the station feels different, though I cannot say exactly why. Perhaps it is only me. I walk the long corridor toward the council chamber, with Laura at my side, and every delegate we pass seems to glance at us a fraction of a second longer than usual, as though word of yesterday's session has traveled further than I expected. Nora reached General Ethan Cole overnight, and his response arrived just before dawn, station time. Our fleet along the border has been quietly repositioned, still within the limits of our treaty obligations, but closer to New Halden than the Council's official records will show for at least another day. It is a small thing, barely a shift, but it tells me the people back home already understand what I only fully accepted last night. Whatever this Council decides today, Earth is not going to wait passively for permission to protect its own. Laura hands me a datapad as we walk. Nora managed to pull one more fragment overnight. It's not much, but it confirms part of what we suspected. I glance at the screen without slowing my pace. A short line of translated text, time-stamped 3 weeks before the attack on New Halden. Confirm hegemony guarantee of non-interference in outer trade routes in exchange for Council non-intervention regarding contested Earth border. They traded us, I say quietly, more to myself than to her. 3 weeks before the attack, Laura confirms. This wasn't a response to an unexpected crisis. It was already agreed to before the first shot was fired. I fold the pad closed and hand it back to her. There is a strange kind of clarity that comes with confirmation, even confirmation of something terrible. Yesterday, I suspected the Council had failed us. This morning, I know they chose to. The chamber doors open ahead of us, and the noise of hundreds of delegates settling into their seats washes over me. I take my place on the speaking floor, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, and for the first time, I do not feel like an outsider being evaluated. I feel like someone who has finally been let in on the rules of a game everyone else has been playing far longer than I realized. Speaker Thess calls the session to order, and her gaze finds mine immediately. Ambassador Hartley, has your government reviewed the Council's proposal? They have, I say, and before I give you their answer, I would like to present something to this chamber. A ripple of murmurs moves through the room. Thess's expression remains composed, but something behind her eyes sharpens. This session was not scheduled for additional evidence, Ambassador. With respect, Speaker, this Council did not schedule a full investigation before drafting a resolution that asked my government to surrender a colony, I say. I believe a few additional minutes are owed. For a moment, I think she will refuse me outright. Then, perhaps because refusing outright in front of this many delegates would raise more questions than allowing it, she gives a small, tight nod. Proceed, Ambassador. Briefly. I step forward, and Laura transmits the fragments Nora recovered to the chamber's central display, stripped of any identifying source, exactly as we agreed the night before. The translated text appears in the air above the speaking floor, visible to every delegation in the chamber. 3 weeks before the attack on New Halden, I say, my voice carrying clearly through the amplification field, an agreement existed between elements of this council and the Skarn hegemony. An agreement in which the hegemony guaranteed non-interference in certain outer trade routes, in exchange for this council's non-intervention regarding a contested border involving Earth. Shock. The chamber is silent in a way I have never heard it before. Not the polite, patient silence of delegates waiting their turn to speak, but something heavier, the silence of a room realizing it has been caught. I want to be clear about what this means, I continue. This was not a resolution born from a desire to prevent conflict after an unexpected tragedy. This was an arrangement made in advance, one that treated the safety of an entire human colony as a bargaining chip in a trade negotiation that had nothing to do with us. Vorka Dresk rises from the Skarn seats, his composure visibly cracking for the first time since I have known him. These documents are unverified. The human delegation could have fabricated them to manipulate this session. They could have, I agree, turning to face him directly, which is exactly why I am not asking this council to simply take my word for it. I am asking for a full, independent investigation conducted by a delegation with no prior involvement in the drafting of yesterday's proposal into the origins of this so-called secondary agreement and into the timeline of hegemony fleet movements in the months preceding the attack on New Halden. Thess's fingers tighten around the edge of her podium. Ambassador Hartley, you are making a serious accusation against this council's integrity. I am asking this council to prove that its integrity is intact, I say. If there is nothing to find, then an investigation will confirm that, and I will stand in this chamber and apologize for the accusation. But if there is something to find, then this council owes my government, and every member species watching this session, an explanation for why it chose convenience over the safety of a colony that trusted it for protection. The chamber erupts into overlapping conversation, dozens of translated voices layering over one another until the sound becomes almost physical. I stand at the center of it, forcing myself to remain still, to let the moment do the work instead of raising my own voice to be heard over the noise. It is Delegate Oren Vashti from the Ithran Concord who eventually speaks over the chaos, his translated voice carrying a note of genuine unease. I would like to formally support the human ambassador's request for an independent investigation. If even a portion of what has been presented is accurate, this council has a responsibility to determine the truth, regardless of how uncomfortable that truth may be. A few other delegates murmur agreement, cautious but audible. I watch Thess's expression shift, calculating, weighing the political cost of refusing an investigation now that a respected delegation has voiced support for one. The council will consider the request, she says finally, though her tone makes clear how little she wants to. A vote will be held before the end of this session. Before that vote, I say, I have one more matter to address, and I ask the council's patience for a few more minutes. Thess's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. Proceed. I turn to face the full chamber, letting my gaze move across the rows of delegates, species old and new, powerful and modest, all of them watching me with an attention I have rarely felt directed at humanity in 11 years on this station. Yesterday, this council asked my government to withdraw from a colony that was attacked without warning, to reduce our ability to defend our people, and to accept oversight from the very hegemony responsible for that attack. I was told this was necessary to preserve regional stability. I pause, letting the words settle. I want this council to understand something about humanity that perhaps has not been made clear enough during our time as a member of this body. I think of the technician's final message, transmitted until the very last second the equipment allowed. We are not a military target. Please confirm you understand that. We did not join this council because we believed in unlimited caution, I say. We joined because we believed that even a young species, one that nearly destroyed itself less than 2 centuries ago, could contribute something meaningful to a galaxy trying to build order out of chaos. We have spent 11 years proving that belief, through patience, through compromise, through accepting slower processes and smaller victories than perhaps we were entitled to, because we believed those processes existed in good faith. I looked directly at Speaker Thess. Yesterday, this council showed me that good faith was not guaranteed, that belief in fairness was, at least in part, a trust extended too easily to a body more interested in stability than in justice. Murmurs ripple through the chamber again, quieter this time, more uncertain. I am not standing here to threaten this council, I continue. I am standing here to tell you plainly what my government has already decided, regardless of how today's vote concludes. Earth will not withdraw from New Halden. Earth will not reduce its defensive presence along that border, and Earth will not accept oversight from the hegemony that attacked its people. Vorka Dresk's expression hardens into something colder than his earlier composure. That is a direct rejection of this council's authority. It is a direct rejection of a proposal built on a secret arrangement between this council and the species responsible for attacking us, I say. There is a difference, and I trust every delegation in this chamber is capable of recognizing it. Thess raises a hand, calling for order as the chamber's noise threatens to rise again. Ambassador Hartley, are you formally declaring that Earth intends to act outside the authority of this council on this matter? I hold her gaze for a long moment before answering. I am declaring that Earth intends to protect its people, with or without this council's permission, because the alternative is to accept that our safety was never truly guaranteed by our membership in this body. If this council chooses to conduct an honest investigation and hold the hegemony accountable for what happened at New Halden, Earth will support that process fully. If this council chooses instead to continue protecting the arrangement I presented today, then Earth will act to protect its own colony, and this chamber will need to decide for itself what that means for its relationship with humanity going forward. The silence that follows is different from every silence before it. It is not confusion, and it is not simple shock. It is the particular stillness of a room realizing that the balance of power within it has shifted, even slightly, even for just this moment, and that nothing said afterward will fully undo that realization. Thess studies me for a long moment, her translated voice, when it finally comes, noticeably quieter than before. The council will proceed to a vote on the investigation, as requested. This session is not yet concluded, Ambassador. Please remain available. I nod once, and step back from the center of the floor. And as I do, I catch Vorka Dresk watching me with an expression that has shifted entirely from satisfaction to something closer to calculation, as though he is now reassessing an opponent he assumed he had already measured completely. Laura leans close as I return to my seat, her voice barely above a whisper. That wasn't in the plan we discussed last night. No, I admit quietly, it wasn't. Was it the right call? I watch Speaker Thess conferring urgently with 2 senior council officials at her platform, watch delegates across the chamber leaning toward one another in hushed, urgent conversation. Watch the entire tone of a room that yesterday treated humanity as a minor inconvenience shift into something far more uncertain. I don't know yet, I say honestly, but I know I couldn't sit in this chamber another day and let them believe we would simply accept whatever they decided for us. The vote, when it finally comes, passes with a margin far narrower than I expected. A clear sign that Thess's control over this chamber is not as absolute as it appeared only a day ago. An independent investigation will be conducted, led by a delegation with no prior involvement in the drafting of the original proposal, into both the origins of the secondary agreement and the timeline of hegemony fleet movements before the attack. It is not a victory, not yet. But as the session finally adjourns and I walk back out through those same tall arched doors, I feel something I have not felt in a long time inside this station, something that used to come easily during humanity's earliest days as a species reaching for the stars, before 11 years of careful diplomacy taught me to keep it buried beneath patience and procedure. I feel the ground shifting beneath a system that assumed it would never have to. The investigation is supposed to take weeks. It takes 6 days for everything to fall apart instead. I am in the Human Delegation Office, reviewing a status report from General Ethan Cole, when Nora bursts through the door without knocking, something she has never done in all the time I have known her. Her face tells me before she says a word that whatever she is about to report is worse than anything we discussed the night after the last session. The Skarn hegemony just moved a full battle group to the edge of the New Halden sector, she says. Not a patrol, a full group, 6 capital ships and support vessels, sitting just outside our declared border. I stand up so fast my chair scrapes loudly against the floor. When? 40 minutes ago. Fleet Command picked it up immediately and flagged it as an emergency. Laura is already pulling up sensor data on the main screen, her hands moving quickly across the console. This isn't a coincidence. The investigation into the secondary agreement was supposed to present preliminary findings tomorrow. If the hegemony knows what that investigation is likely to reveal, this could be an attempt to force a resolution before the truth comes out. Or it's retaliation for what happened in the chamber, Nora says. Either way, that battle group is close enough to strike New Halden again within hours, if they choose to. I feel the weight of the moment settle over the room, the same cold clarity I felt the night I read the technician's final message. This is no longer a diplomatic dispute unfolding slowly across weeks of careful maneuvering. This is a colony, again sitting exposed and undefended, waiting to see whether the adults arguing in a distant chamber will decide its fate in time to matter. Get me General Cole, I say, now. It takes only a few minutes for the connection to establish, though it feels far longer. Ethan Cole appears on the screen, his uniform crisp, despite what must be a chaotic morning at Fleet Headquarters, his expression carrying the particular calm of someone who has already run through every immediate option available to him. Ambassador, he says without preamble, our forward elements are already moving into defensive positions along the border. We anticipated a scenario like this after the last council session, so we're not starting from zero. But I need clarity on rules of engagement before this goes any further, because right now we are legally bound by treaty language that assumes this council is acting as an honest arbiter. That language assumed something that is no longer true, I say. What can our fleet do without formally breaking treaty terms? We can defend New Halden directly, and we can respond to any hostile action within the declared border, Cole says. What we cannot do without triggering a formal treaty violation is cross into contested space to preemptively engage that battle group before it moves. Then we wait for them to make the first move, I say, hating the words even as I say them, and we make sure we are ready the instant they do. We're already ready, Ambassador, Cole says. Ships have been repositioned, defense grids at New Halden are reinforced, and we have reserve elements standing by 2 jumps out. If that battle group crosses the border, we will not be caught the way we were 12 days ago. But I won't pretend the numbers favor us if this becomes a sustained engagement. We need this council to act, and we need it to act today. I close the connection and turn to Laura and Nora, both of them watching me with the particular stillness of people waiting to be told what happens next. Outside the window, the station continues its slow rotation, indifferent to the fact that somewhere along a border light years away, people are once again waiting to see if today is the day their homes disappear. Get me an emergency session with the speaker, I say. I don't care what protocol says about scheduling. I want the full council in that chamber within the hour. Laura is already moving toward the comm station, but she glances back at me before she starts transmitting the request. And if they refuse an emergency session? I think of Speaker Thess's careful, measured voice, the way she has spent every session since the first one trying to keep this entire situation contained within language and procedure, as though the right combination of diplomatic phrasing could undo what was already set in motion 3 weeks before the attack on New Halden. They won't refuse, I say. Not with a hegemony battle group sitting on a contested border, 6 days into an investigation into their own secret dealings. Refusing now would look exactly like what it is. I am right, though it takes nearly 2 hours instead of 1 before the emergency session convenes. By the time I walk back into that chamber, the atmosphere has changed entirely from every previous session. Delegates who once seemed detached and unhurried now speak in urgent, overlapping tones as they take their seats, and even Speaker Thess's usual composure appears strained as she calls the session to order. This emergency session has been convened at the request of the human delegation, she says, following reports of a significant Scarn hegemony fleet movement toward the contested New Halden sector. Ambassador Hartley, you may address the chamber. I step onto the speaking floor, and this time I do not feel the same uncertainty I felt during my first session here. I feel focused, sharpened by 6 days of watching an investigation crawl toward the truth while a colony sat exposed, waiting. 6 days ago, this council voted to investigate a secret arrangement between elements of this body and the Scarn hegemony, I say. 40 minutes before this session was called, a hegemony battle group of 6 capital ships and support vessels moved to the edge of the very border that arrangement was designed to trade away. I do not believe that timing is a coincidence, and I do not believe this chamber does either. Vorka Dresk rises immediately, his voice sharp. The hegemony fleet is conducting routine training exercises within its own recognized space. This is not an act of aggression. 6 capital ships positioned at the edge of a contested border, 12 days after a strike on a civilian colony, and 6 days into an investigation of your government's secret dealings with this council, is not routine, I say, turning to face him directly. You may call it training. I call it a threat, and I believe every delegate in this chamber, if they are being honest, sees it the same way. Delegate Oren Vashti rises from the Ithran seats before Vorka can respond. I would remind this chamber that the human delegation's request for an investigation was already supported by a council vote. A hostile fleet movement at this specific moment does raise serious questions about the hegemony's intentions, questions this body cannot simply dismiss. The chamber fills with overlapping voices again, dozens of species debating, some clearly alarmed, others still cautious about committing to a position that might anger the hegemony before all the facts are confirmed. I let it continue for a moment, watching the room, before Speaker Thess finally raises her hand for order. Ambassador Hartley, she says, what is the human delegation requesting of this council? I take a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything that has led to this exact moment. 11 years of careful diplomacy, 6 days of watching a colony sit exposed while an investigation moved too slowly to matter. A message from a technician who kept transmitting until the very last second the equipment allowed. I am requesting that this council issue an immediate formal condemnation of the hegemony's fleet movement and demand its withdrawal from the border within 24 hours, I say. I am requesting that this council commit, publicly, to standing behind its member states when they are threatened, rather than quietly trading their safety away in arrangements made behind closed doors. And if the council issues that condemnation, Thess says carefully, and the hegemony does not withdraw. I look around the chamber one final time, at delegates who have spent 11 years measuring humanity, by our patience, by our willingness to accept smaller victories and slower processes in exchange for a seat at this table. I think of every ancestor who faced impossible odds and chose to stand rather than kneel, not out of anger, but because some lines, once crossed, cannot simply be negotiated back into place. If the hegemony does not withdraw, I say, my voice steady and clear enough to carry to every corner of that vast chamber, then Earth will defend New Halden with everything we have, with or without this council's approval. We have spent 11 years asking this body to treat us as equals, to trust that our patience was met with good faith in return. I have learned this week that trust was misplaced, so I will say plainly what I came here today to say. I pause, and in that pause, the entire chamber seems to hold its breath, Hundreds of delegates from 42 worlds waiting to hear what a species barely 2 centuries removed from its own near destruction will choose when finally pushed past the edge of patience. It's time for battle. The words land in that chamber like something physical, a shift in the air itself. For a moment, no one speaks. I see Speaker Thess's composed expression finally break, just slightly, into something between shock and disbelief. I see Vorka Dresk's jaw tighten, his eyes narrowing, as though recalculating an equation that no longer balances the way he expected. I see delegates across the chamber exchanging glances, some horrified, some, unexpectedly, something closer to respect. "Ambassador Hartley," Thess says finally, her voice quieter than I have ever heard it, "do you understand what you are declaring in front of this entire council?" "I understand exactly what I am declaring," I say. "I am declaring that humanity will not stand by while this body decides our fate in secret arrangements with the species attacking us. I am declaring that we will protect our people, our colony, and our right to exist as an equal member of this galaxy, and that we will do so with clarity, not apology." I look directly at Vorka Dresk, and I am declaring, to the Skarn hegemony specifically, that the battle group sitting at our border has 24 hours to withdraw, or it will find that the species it tested 12 days ago has spent every one of those days preparing for exactly this moment. The chamber erupts, voices overlapping in a dozen languages, some outraged, some alarmed, some, quietly, almost approving. I stand at the center of it, steady, because there is nothing left to hide behind, no careful diplomatic phrasing that can soften what has already been said. For the first time since I arrived on this station 11 years ago, I am not trying to prove that humanity deserves patience. I am telling this council exactly what we have decided to do instead. The chamber does not calm down for nearly 20 minutes. Speaker Thess calls for order 3 times before the noise finally settles into something resembling control, and when it does, the room feels different in a way I do not think will ever fully reverse itself. Delegates who once looked at humanity with polite condescension now look at me with expressions ranging from alarm to open curiosity, as though I have suddenly become a variable they no longer know how to calculate. Thess finally speaks, her voice carefully measured, though I can hear the effort it takes her to keep it that way. "Ambassador Hartley, this council cannot simply endorse a unilateral declaration of intent to engage in conflict. Such action requires formal deliberation. I did not ask this council to endorse anything," I say. "I informed this council of what my government has already decided. There is a difference, Speaker, and I believe this chamber understands it clearly by now. You are asking us to accept that a member state will act outside council authority," she says. "I am telling this chamber that a member state will defend itself, because this council's own arrangement with the hegemony made clear that our safety was never guaranteed by our membership in the first place," I say. "If this body wishes to reclaim its authority, it can do so by standing with us, condemning the fleet movement at our border, and demanding the hegemony withdraw. If it does not, then it can watch humanity defend New Halden alone, and it can explain to every other member species afterward why it chose silence over its own founding principles." Delegate Oren Vashti rises again, his translated voice carrying clearly through the settling noise. "For what it is worth, Speaker, I believe the Ithran Concord would support a formal condemnation. Whatever one thinks of the ambassador's methods, the underlying facts remain troubling, and this council's credibility is already damaged by 6 days of an investigation that appears to confirm exactly what was alleged." A ripple of agreement moves through several delegations, quieter and more hesitant than outright support, but present nonetheless. I watch Thess weigh the moment, calculating, the same way she did 6 days ago, and I understand now that this council's real weakness was never a lack of power. It was a habit of choosing the path that avoided difficulty over the path that required conviction. The vote that follows is faster than any I have witnessed since arriving on this station. The council formally condemns the hegemony's fleet movement and issues a demand for withdrawal within 24 hours, the same window I named without their authorization only minutes earlier. It is not the full reckoning I wanted, not yet an admission of the secret arrangement's full extent, but it is a council finally choosing to stand somewhere instead of nowhere. Vorka Dresk leaves the chamber before the session officially closes, his expression unreadable, his usual composure entirely gone. I do not know, in that moment, whether the hegemony will withdraw or whether we are about to find out exactly how far this conflict will go. What I know is that for the first time in 11 years, I walked into that chamber not asking to be understood, but stating plainly what would happen next, and the room listened. The following hours pass slower than any I can remember. Laura, Nora, and I remain in the delegation office, monitoring updates from General Cole as they arrive, each one a small fragment of a much larger picture forming in real time. The hegemony battle group does not withdraw immediately. For nearly 18 hours, it remains exactly where it was. Engines idle, a silent test of whether humanity's declaration in that chamber was resolve or bluff. I do not sleep during those 18 hours. Neither does anyone else in the delegation office. We sit together, watching sensor updates scroll across the main screen, drinking cold coffee that none of us actually finish, saying very little, because there is very little left to say that has not already been said in that chamber. It is Nora who finally breaks the silence, close to the 17th hour, her voice quiet in the dim room. Whatever happens in the next few hours, you should know something. I've been doing this job a long time, watching how different species react under pressure. What you did in that chamber today, most delegations I've studied would never risk it. Most would rather lose slowly and safely than risk everything on a single moment of conviction. Maybe that's exactly why the hegemony thought testing us would work, I say. Maybe they expected we'd behave the way every other species in that room usually does. Maybe, Nora says. But you didn't. The withdrawal finally begins at hour 19. It is not dramatic, no sudden retreat or visible change in formation at first, just a slow, deliberate repositioning of the hegemony battle group away from the contested border, ship by ship, over the course of nearly 4 hours. By the time General Cole confirms full withdrawal, the sun is rising over the station's simulated day cycle, and I realize none of us in this room have moved from our seats in longer than I can remember. They pulled back, Laura says quietly, staring at the confirmation on the screen as though she does not quite trust it. They pulled back, I repeat, and for the first time since the emergency session began, I feel something in my chest loosen slightly. Not relief exactly, because I know this is far from over, but something adjacent to it. The days that follow bring their own kind of aftermath, quieter than the crisis itself, but no less significant. The investigation into the secondary agreement, freed from whatever quiet pressure had been slowing it, moves quickly once the hegemony's withdrawal removes the immediate excuse for delay. Within a week, the full details emerge, confirming everything Nora's fragments had suggested and more. 3 council officials, none of them Speaker Thess herself, are found to have negotiated the arrangement independently, trading Earth's border security for concessions in trade routes that benefited their own home species far more than they benefited any notion of galactic stability. The officials are removed from their positions. It is a smaller consequence than I believe the situation deserves, but it is public, documented, and undeniable, which is more than this council has ever offered humanity before in matters concerning our safety. I am called before the chamber one final time in the weeks that follow, not for another confrontation, but for what the council formally labels a review session, a chance for member states to respond to everything that has unfolded. The atmosphere is entirely different from every previous session I have attended. Delegates who once spoke about humanity with careful condescension now choose their words more deliberately, aware that the species they are addressing has demonstrated something this council apparently did not expect. Speaker Thess opens the session with unusual directness. Ambassador Hartley, the council acknowledges the findings of the independent investigation, and formally apologizes to Earth for the failures that led to the events at New Halden. It is not everything. It does not undo the 6 hours of silence, or the technician's final message, or the homes that were lost before this council ever agreed to look honestly at what happened. But it is an acknowledgement, spoken plainly in front of every delegation in this chamber, and after everything, that matters more than I expected it to. The council appreciates that acknowledgement, I say, keeping my voice measured, though something in me finally allows itself to feel the weight of the last several weeks settling. Earth remains committed to this council, and to the principle that member species should be able to trust one another, even when that trust has been tested. Delegate Oren Vashti speaks next, his tone thoughtful rather than formal. Ambassador, I will admit that when you first stood in this chamber and declared it was time for battle, I believed I was witnessing a species making a grave miscalculation, one that would cost you dearly. I have since reconsidered that assessment. What I witnessed instead was a species choosing honesty over comfortable silence, even when honesty carried real risk. I nod, but I do not offer a long response, because I think the moment speaks clearly enough on its own. Around the chamber, I notice something I have not seen in 11 years. Delegates from species far older and more established than humanity, looking at our small, relatively young delegation, not with condescension, but with something closer to careful respect, the kind reserved for someone whose measure you have finally taken accurately. After the session, as I walk back through the station's long corridors with Laura beside me, she glances over with a small, tired smile. You know, back on Earth, they're already calling it something. The moment in the chamber. Calling it what? The Declaration, she says. Some outlets are running the full quote as a headline. Human Diplomat stuns Galactic Council. It's time for battle. I laugh quietly, the first real laugh I have allowed myself in what feels like weeks. I didn't exactly plan for it to become a headline. No, Laura agrees, but I think it needed to be said exactly the way you said it. Anything softer, and they might not have believed we meant it. We walk in comfortable silence for a while, past delegates from a dozen species who nod toward us now with expressions I have not seen directed at humanity before, something between curiosity and genuine acknowledgement. I think about New Halden, about the colony now under stronger protection than it has ever had, about families who no longer wonder if the next silence on their communication channels will be the last one they hear. I think about 11 years of proving ourselves through patience, and about the 6 days that finally proved something different, that patience without limits is not the same as strength, and that sometimes the clearest form of diplomacy is simply telling the truth plainly enough that no one in the room can pretend not to have heard it. Nora finds us near the observation deck later that evening, 3 glasses of something the Ithran delegation insisted on gifting us after the session, a pale golden drink that tastes faintly of citrus and something I cannot quite name. We stand together at the wide window, looking out at the slow rotation of the station against a backdrop of countless stars, each one representing a species, a history, a set of choices that led them to this same chamber, the same careful, imperfect attempt to build order among so much difference. So what happens now? Nora asks, swirling her glass slowly. Now we keep doing the work, I say, carefully, honestly, but without pretending that patience alone will always be enough to keep our people safe. And if this council tries something like this again, Laura asks. I think of Speaker Thess's genuine unease during that final review session, of Vorka Dresk's composure finally cracking in the chamber, of an entire council forced to reckon publicly with a truth it clearly would have preferred to keep buried. Then they'll remember exactly what happened the last time they underestimated us, I say. And I don't think they'll make that mistake twice. Outside the window, the station continues its endless, quiet rotation, carrying all of us forward into whatever comes next, a galaxy slightly more aware now of a young species that chose, when finally pushed to the edge of its patience, not to fold quietly, but to stand and speak with a clarity this council had never expected from us. Somewhere out among those stars, New Halden's lights burn steady again, watched over by ships that will not be caught unprepared a second time. And somewhere in the translated records of this council, a single sentence remains, spoken plainly in a chamber built for careful, bloodless diplomacy, a sentence that changed how an entire galaxy understood what humanity was willing to do to protect its own. It's time for battle. Not because we wanted war, because finally, they understood we would never again pretend we did not mean it.